The silent wait. The night was quiet. Dwayne Douglas Johnson sat alone in his small room, the kind of silence that presses heavy on your chest. Outside, the city lights flickered, but inside, his mind was louder than the streets. His heart raced, not because of excitement, but because of fear. Fear of tomorrow, fear of failing, fear of himself. He was big, strong, and heavy. But inside, he felt fragile. People who saw him thought he was unbreakable, a mountain of muscle. But in the mirror, Dwayne saw something else. He saw the boy who once cried in the bathroom when he had no place to go. He saw the man who once felt like he had no future. He saw weight, not only on his body, but on his spirit. For years, he carried that weight. Rejection, humiliation, dreams that broke in his hands like glass. There was a time when he thought football would save him. It didn't. There was a time when he thought strength alone was enough. It wasn't. And tonight, as he sat on the edge of his bed, he wondered if tomorrow would be any different. The suspense of his life was not about winning championships or starring in movies. The suspense was simple. Could he survive himself? Could he rise from the shadows of failure and the chains of his own body? The beginning of change. Back then, Dwayne wasn't the polished figure the world knows today. His body was large, yes, but it was not yet shaped by discipline. His weight was something people whispered about, as if his size was a symbol of both strength and weakness. He often walked into rooms where eyes followed him, some out of admiration, others out of doubt. Too big, they said. Too heavy. He'll never make it. Those words dug into him like claws. He carried them everywhere, along with the memory of his family's struggles. The eviction notices, the empty fridge, the long drives where silence was louder than conversation. He remembered his mother's tears when they lost their home. He remembered the shame of feeling powerless. But even in those dark moments, there was something inside him. Tiny, almost invisible, a voice that whispered, "Don't give up." Family, love, and resilience. His father, Rocky Johnson, was a wrestler. Tough, strict, sometimes harsh. Dwayne respected him, but their relationship was not always easy. His mother, Ada, was softer yet unshakable in her love. When the world seemed too heavy, she reminded him of kindness. She reminded him that respect begins at home, that no matter how strong you look, true strength is measured in love. It was her voice he remembered on nights like these. "Dwayne, storms don't last forever." He would close his eyes and hear her words. Storms don't last forever. And so, the boy who carried weight began to imagine a man who could lift it. The transformation of the body change did not happen overnight. It began with small choices. Early mornings, sweat dripping on cold gym floors, meals that tasted bland but built discipline. He cut out what broke him. He embraced what could build him. At first, he hated it. The pain, the hunger, the long hours lifting weights when no one was watching. But slowly, his body began to shift. The heaviness turned into shape, the fat into muscle. His reflection started to change, and with it, his belief. Still, it wasn't easy. There were days he wanted to quit. Days he stared at the scale and cursed. It. Days when voices from the past returned, whispering, "You'll never be enough." But Dwayne kept going. He wasn't only lifting weights, he was lifting his life. Every rep was a rebellion against the darkness. Every drop of sweat was proof that he could choose who he became. The emotional turning point one day, as he stood in front of the mirror after a long workout, something unusual happened. He looked at himself, not with anger, but with pride. For the first time, he didn't just see a body. He saw a man. But more than that, he saw a responsibility. He thought of kids who were like him, lost, insecure, carrying their own storms. He thought of his mother, who never stopped believing in him. He thought of the countless failures that shaped him. And in that moment, he made a promise. He would not live for just himself. He would live to inspire. He would turn his pain into strength. He would turn his story into light for others. Kindness and humility. As his body transformed, so did his heart. Fame had not yet arrived, but the seeds were planted. Dwayne learned to smile at strangers, to treat everyone, rich or poor, with respect. He held doors open, he listened, he remembered names. He knew what it felt like to be invisible, so he chose to make others feel seen. People noticed, not just the muscles, but the humility. They saw the size of his body, yes, but more than that, they began to see the size of his kindness. Suspense for what comes next, but life was not finished testing him. New challenges waited, bigger, louder, more public. And just when he thought he had finally built himself up, the world would push him down again. Football was gone. Dreams of the NFL had vanished. His pockets were empty. And soon, he would stand at the edge of everything he had worked for, about to lose it all. What he didn't know then was that these very losses would lead him to the stage of wrestling, and later, to the screens of Hollywood. What he didn't know was that his kindness, humility, and resilience would one day make him more than a star. They would make him a symbol. But for now, he was still the man in the small room. The man who fought with his own reflection. The man carrying storms inside his chest. And the question remained, would he rise or would he fall? The fall before. The rise. The morning after that long night of silence, Dwayne woke up with a weight on his chest that had nothing to do with muscle. It was the weight of loss. He had once dreamed of playing football at the highest level. He trained, he fought, he sacrificed. But when the dream ended, it ended fast. He was cut from the Canadian Football League. No contract, no team, no hope. He returned home with only $7 in his pocket. $7, that was all. The man with the body of a warrior had the wallet of a beggar. His father saw the defeat in his eyes. His mother tried to smile, but Dwayne could hear her crying when she thought he was asleep, the darkness inside. For weeks, Dwayne fell into silence. He stayed in his room, curtains closed, his mind sinking deeper into shadows. Failure burned like fire inside him. He felt worthless, like his future had already ended at 23. Every knock on the door felt heavy. Every phone call felt like bad news. People who once cheered for him now seemed to forget his name. He started to ask himself painful questions. What if I am not meant for anything? What if I am just another failure? One night, the thoughts became too heavy. He sat in his car, staring into nothing. His hands trembled. The road ahead felt empty. In that moment, he thought about ending everything, but then he remembered his mother, the one who prayed for him every night, the one who believed storms don't last forever. And he whispered to himself, not yet. Not like this. The spark of resilience, slowly, he began to crawl out of the darkness. He walked back into the gym, not for football, not for glory, but for survival. The gym became his therapy. Every lift, every rep was not about building muscle. It was about rebuilding his spirit. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew he had to prepare for it. He trained harder than ever before. People around him noticed. The intensity in his eyes, the fire in his movements. He was no longer chasing football. He was chasing life itself. A door opens. It was during this time that his father spoke to him. Son, wrestling is in your blood. It's in your name. Maybe this is where you belong. At first, Dwayne resisted. Wrestling was his father's world, not his. He didn't want to live in someone else's shadow. But deep inside, he felt a pull. Maybe this was the second chance he was waiting for, so he agreed to try. He stepped into the wrestling ring for the first time not as The Rock, but as a young man trying to prove he was more than a failure. He was clumsy, awkward, unsure. But he had something that could not be taught: heart. The Battle with Doubt fans didn't love him right away. In fact, they booed him. They chanted against him. They told him he didn't belong. Every night he returned to his hotel room, the same. Question echoed in his mind. Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong. But then he remembered the $7. He remembered the silence of failure. He remembered the weight of almost giving up. And he said to himself, "No, I will not stop here." The kindness within, outside the ring, Dwayne carried himself differently. He treated fans with respect even when they booed him. He signed autographs with a smile. He greeted staff with kindness, no matter how small their job seemed. People noticed. Slowly, the crowd began to change. They still doubted, but they also began to see something real in him, something raw and human. The birth of the Rocket was not overnight, but slowly, the man once drowning in doubt began to rise. He found a new character, a new voice, a new energy inside the ring. He wasn't just Dwayne anymore. He was The Rock, and when he finally stood in the ring with the microphone, he didn't just talk. He owned the moment. His confidence lit up arenas. His words made crowds roar. His presence filled every corner of the room. The same man who once had $7 in his pocket was now on his way to becoming one of the biggest names in wrestling. Suspense for what comes next, but success, as always, came with its own tests. Fame grew, money came, lights followed him everywhere. But behind the scenes, Dwayne still carried scars. He still battled self-doubt. He still feared losing it all again. And in Hollywood, another door would soon open, one that would test not only his career, but his soul. Hollywood doors, the arenas were loud, the lights blinding, the chants of The Rock shook the walls. In wrestling, Dwayne Johnson had finally become a star. But inside, he felt something more, an itch for something bigger. He wanted to step beyond the ring. He wanted to tell stories, not just fight in them. Hollywood called to him like a distant echo. But the moment he tried to step into that world, the cheers turned back into silence. The first rejection, she walked into rooms filled with producers and casting agents. They looked him up and down, his muscles, his size, his wrestling fame, and they said the same words again and again. Too big, too loud, too much. In their eyes, he was not an actor. He was a wrestler pretending to be one. Doors closed before they even opened. Scripts slipped through his fingers. Roles went to others. Each rejection felt like a punch heavier than any he had taken in the ring. The fight with his image Hollywood had its own rules. Back then, actors had to be smaller, leaner, polished. But Dwayne was massive, larger than life. He was told to lose weight, to shrink himself, to fit into a mold that was not made for him. For a moment, he tried. He changed his look, cut down his body, adjusted his style. But in the mirror, he no longer recognized himself. He had traded his identity for acceptance. The worst part, Hollywood still didn't embrace him. The silence of rejection returned. Just like after football, just like the $7. The breaking point. There was a day when he sat alone in his apartment in Los Angeles, staring at stacks of rejection letters. His phone was quiet. His spirit was heavy. He thought, maybe this is not for me. Maybe wrestling was all I had. But then he remembered the promise he once made to himself, that he would not live only for himself, that he would turn his pain into light for others. So he asked himself, how can I inspire people if I give up now? The turning choice. Instead of shrinking, he made a bold decision. He would stop trying to fit into Hollywood's mold. He would be himself. The big, muscular, larger-than-life man who carried storms in his chest but spoke with kindness. He decided to walk into rooms as Dwayne Johnson, not a version of himself cut down to fit others' expectations. And slowly, things began to change. The first chance, it was not immediate, but eventually, opportunities arrived. Small roles at first, appearances that barely scratched the surface. But he treated every role, no matter how small, with respect. He showed up, early, listened carefully, worked harder than anyone else on set. Crew members, extras, and even strangers noticed his humility. He remembered his mother's words, "Storms don't last forever." And one day, a bigger chance came. Hollywood decided to test him in leading roles. Battles on and off screen, but Hollywood was not only about acting. It was about image, fame, money, and ego. Everywhere he went, he saw people lose themselves in the lights. Dwayne made a choice. He would not forget where he came from. He would not forget the $7. He would not forget the tears of his mother. So, he treated everyone the same. From the director to the janitor, he shook hands, smiled, and remembered names. He gave time to fans, even when schedules were tight. His kindness became as powerful as his muscles. The Rise films began to grow. The Rock was no longer just a wrestler turned actor. He was becoming a box office force. From action films to comedies, from serious roles to family movies, he showed range, energy, and a presence that audiences loved. People didn't just see the muscles anymore. They saw the man who had fought storms, who had carried failure, who had risen again and again, suspense for what comes next. But success brings new pressure, money, fame, and endless eyes watching every move. Behind the smiles, he carried exhaustion. Behind the laughter, he carried worry. And soon, his journey would no longer be just about his career. It would turn into something deeper, about love, family, and the legacy he wanted to leave. The man who once had nothing now had everything. But could he hold on to his humility when the world tried to make him forget? The heart behind the strength, the lights of Hollywood grew brighter. The roles grew bigger. The money came faster than ever before. Dwayne Johnson was now a name that echoed across the world. But when the cameras stopped rolling, when the crowds went home, he was still just Dwayne, the man who once sat with only $7 in his pocket, the son who once watched his mother cry over rent. And deep inside, he knew something the world often forgets. Success means nothing if you lose your heart. The weight of love. His career demanded long hours, endless flights, months away from home. But whenever he looked into the eyes of his family, he remembered why he was fighting so hard. He thought of his mother, Atta, her tears, her prayers, her resilience. She had once walked through storms so he could stand in the sunlight. She reminded him of humility, of kindness, of never forgetting your roots no matter how high you climb. He thought of his daughters. When they smiled, he saw purity. When they cried, he felt weakness in his chest. Their small hands could calm a man built like a mountain, and in those moments, he understood. The greatest strength a man can have is not in his muscles, but in his love. The scars of the past, but family also brought back memories of pain. His parents' struggles, the financial hardship, the fights, the loneliness. He carried those scars, but instead of hiding them, he used them. He told his daughters stories of those hard days so they would know that respect, resilience, and kindness are worth more than money. He wanted them to see not just the man on movie screens, but the boy who once failed, cried, and rose again. The bold act of kindness. One day, while leaving a film set, he saw a fan waiting outside. A young boy standing quietly, holding nothing but a piece of paper. Security moved to push him aside, but Dwayne stopped. He walked over, bent down, and asked, "How are you, buddy?" The boy's eyes filled with tears. He said he was bullied in school because of his size. He said people laughed at him, just like they once laughed at Dwayne. Without hesitation, Dwayne hugged him. He told him, "You are stronger than you know. Don't let anyone define you. Remember, storms don't last forever." That moment wasn't caught by cameras. It wasn't for headlines. It was simply a man passing on the strength he had once borrowed from his mother's words. Humility in the spotlight. Hollywood tried to turn him into a brand. Studios wanted the perfect star, flawless and untouchable. But Dwayne chose another path. He laughed at himself. He admitted his struggles. He spoke openly about his battles with depression, about the pain of failure, about the truth behind the muscles. Audiences didn't just admire him, they connected with him. Because behind the fame, he was still human. The emotional turning point there was a night when he stood on stage at an award show. The crowd cheered, the lights blinded, and the trophy weighed heavy in his hands. But as he looked at the golden statue, he thought of something else. He thought of sitting in that small room. Years ago, curtains closed, his spirit breaking. He thought of almost giving up. He thought of the silence of failure, and tears filled his eyes. Because now, standing on that stage, he wasn't just the rock. He was proof that storms do end, that pain can become strength, that failure can become light for others. Suspense for what comes next. Yet even as he rose higher, life had one more lesson waiting. It wasn't about fame or money. It was about legacy. The question now wasn't, can I succeed? He had already answered that. The new question was, how can I use my success to change others' lives? How can I leave something behind that lasts longer than fame? The man once defined by muscle was about to discover that the strongest thing he could build was not his body, but his legacy of kindness. The legacy of kindness. The world now knew his name. From wrestling rings to Hollywood screens, from action films to heartfelt comedies, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson had become a global icon. But late at night, when the noise of fame faded, he asked himself a question. What will people remember about me when I am gone? Not the muscles, not the money, not even the movies. He wanted them to remember his kindness. The reflection of failure. He often spoke about his $7, the time when he had nothing. He spoke about the depression that nearly ended his life. He spoke about being laughed at, rejected, and told he would never succeed. And people listened, not because he was a star, but because he was honest. He carried his scars in the open so others would know they were not alone. His failure had become his gift. It gave hope to millions who were struggling in silence. Family first. In interviews, he always spoke of his family. His mother, his daughters, his loved ones. When he was with them, the world saw not a superstar, but a father, a son, a man who valued love above everything else. He shared videos of singing songs with his daughters. He shared stories of his mother's strength. He reminded the world that success without family is empty. In a world obsessed with power, he reminded people of something simple. Respect begins at home. The gift of giving back with fame came fortune, and with fortune came opportunity. Dwayne chose not to build walls, but to build bridges. He donated to schools, supported children fighting illnesses, and surprised fans with visits they would never forget. There was a story of him buying a truck for a Navy veteran who had inspired him. The veteran broke down in tears, unable to believe that The Rock himself had given him such a gift. Dwayne simply smiled and said, "Thank you for your service." No cameras, no show, just kindness. The emotional Beatone evening, after a long day of filming, he sat quietly in his home. His daughter came to him and asked, "Daddy, are you the strongest man in the world?" He laughed softly and hugged her. "No, baby," he said. "The strongest people are the ones who never stop being kind." In that moment, he knew his true legacy was not his strength, not his fame, not even his story. It was the love he gave, the respect he showed, and the kindness he spread. The reflection for us, Dwayne Johnson's journey is not just about a boy who became a star. It is about all of us. We all carry storms. We all face rejection. We all feel like failures at times. But his story reminds us that storms don't last forever, that failure can shape us, that kindness is strength, and that love is the greatest victory of all. From $7 in his pocket to millions of hearts in his hands, he showed the world that resilience can turn pain into power. And as his story continues, one truth remains. The rock is not defined by how much he lifts, but by how much he lifts others.